signed a new agreement with South Africa, and the two countries will work together in the mining sector. This deal is part of Nigeria's plan to reduce its reliance on oil and grow other sectors of its economy. Nigeria has rich deposits of critical minerals like gold, iron ore, lithium, and zinc, but many of these resources remain untapped or underused. The agreement sets out a 2-year work plan. Both countries will share mining data, use drones to map minerals, and to develop energy and agriculture-related minerals. Now, South Africa brings valuable experience to the table. It already has a strong mining industry, and this collaboration with the deal, both sides have pledged to advance intra-African trade. Nigeria has over 3 billion tons of iron ore, about 10 million tons of lead and zinc spreading across states, and the country's lithium reserves value at a staggering $34 billion.
In the world of global economics, power rarely shifts overnight. But sometimes one decision, one alliance, or one unexpected move can reshape the entire balance of power. Today, we examine one of the most strategic what-if scenarios in the modern economic landscape. What would happen if Nigeria and South Africa, Africa's two largest economies, simultaneously announced a freeze on $120 billion in U.S. linked trade, investment flows, and strategic imports? This scenario has never happened in real life, but experts say it reveals something far more important than a single decision. It exposes how dramatically global power is shifting, how Africa is rising in influence, and how the United States is far more dependent on African markets, minerals, technology inputs, and trade routes than most Americans realize. Nigeria and South Africa together form the backbone of Africa's financial, industrial, and demographic power. With nearly 300 million people combined, massive natural resources, growing consumer markets, and expanding infrastructure networks, they represent a region the U.S. cannot ignore. But in recent years, Africa has begun charting a path that doesn't revolve around Washington. New partnerships with BRICS members, China, the Middle East, and internal African trade agreements have given these nations more leverage than ever before. And the United States, dealing with its own economic pressures, rising inflation, and job market instability, finds itself facing a world where Africa is no longer simply accepting U.S. terms by default. In this scenario, Nigeria and South Africa announce a coordinated freeze on all U.S. linked trade worth an estimated $120 billion in goods, services, financial flows, manufacturing components, agricultural inputs, and mineral contracts. The announcement shocks global markets instantly. Investors scramble, Washington holds emergency meetings. Analysts begin dissecting the implications, and throughout Africa, the move is celebrated as a bold demonstration of economic sovereignty. To understand the impact, we first explore how the U.S. economy is tied to Africa. Despite popular assumptions, the United States relies heavily on African minerals used in electronics, aerospace, energy storage, and advanced manufacturing. Platinum from South Africa powers catalytic converters and medical equipment. Manganese and chromium remain essential to U.S. steel production. Nigeria provides vital petroleum blends that stabilize gasoline prices and jet fuel markets. Agricultural links run deep as well. American wheat, poultry, and machinery flow into African markets, while Africa supplies cocoa, metal ores, and crucial manufacturing minerals to American factories. When Nigeria and South Africa freeze trade, the first shock hits commodity markets. Platinum prices surge instantly, shaking U.S. automakers and medical equipment companies. Oil markets experience a ripple effect, as Nigerian crude shipments slow down and American refiners lose one of their most reliable sources of sweet crude. Within hours, analysts on Wall Street warned that gas prices may rise again, not because America lacks oil, but because the global market is sensitive to supply shifts. The freeze creates uncertainty, and that alone triggers price volatility. Meanwhile, technology and manufacturing companies in the U.S. begin issuing internal memos. Many rely on South African minerals for electronics components, batteries, and industrial processes. Without smooth access, production lines could slow, supply chains could tighten, and businesses already dealing with inflation feel new pressure. But the shock to the U.S. is only the visible part of another, Deeper story, the rise of African decision-making power. Nigeria and South Africa's coordinated freeze is significant not because it hurts the U.S. instantly, but because it symbolizes a shift in global alignment. In this scenario, the two countries redirect some of their U.S.-linked trade toward growing partners such as China, India, the UAE, Brazil, and other African nations under the African Continental Free Trade Area Agreement. This move reinforces Africa's growing role as a global player capable of choosing its partners strategically rather than by historical default. The U.S. response begins with diplomatic outreach. Washington seeks immediate conversations, emphasizing historical partnerships and mutual benefits. But behind the scenes, analysts warn policymakers that the U.S. has long underestimated Africa's leverage. American companies, especially in manufacturing, aerospace, and energy, have built multi-billion-dollar operations that depend on African imports. Rebuilding those supply chains elsewhere could take years, even decades. The global conversation begins shifting. News outlets discuss how Africa's economic influence has grown from a quiet force into a strategic determinant of global market stability. Economists debate whether the U.S. must rethink its foreign policy approaches. Social media explodes with discussions about Africa's rise, economic independence, and geopolitical realignment. Young Africans celebrate the moment, viewing it as symbolic of a new century where the continent plays a central role in global economics. But perhaps the biggest shock emerges from the U.S. domestic job market. Many Americans do not realize how deeply intertwined certain industries are with African resources and trade networks. Aerospace manufacturing, electric vehicle components, medical device production, and even agriculture rely on African imports. When this $120 billion freeze hits, even hypothetically, analysts estimate that tens of thousands of U.S. jobs could face uncertainty if alternative supply chains aren't secured quickly. Companies begin discussing potential layoffs, reduced operations, or increased costs. Washington realizes that the U.S. cannot afford to lose access to African markets. And while the scenario is hypothetical, it reveals a truth many policymakers have overlooked. Global influence is shifting, and Africa's economic choices hold serious weight. Nigeria and South Africa, in this scenario, use the freeze not as a declaration of hostility, but as a strategic economic message. They emphasize that Africa must get fairer trade terms, stronger investment partnerships, and respect for its sovereignty. They advocate for the diversification of economic alliances and promote greater intra-African trade as a foundation for long-term independence. The longer the freeze lasts, the more the narrative changes in Washington. It shifts from Africa relies on us to we may be underestimating Africa's influence. And this is precisely where the scenario becomes most revealing. The U.S. recognizes that it cannot take African partnerships for granted. The Global South's influence is rising, and Africa is shaping its own future. As weeks pass, the freeze drives global debate. Experts warn that the world is entering a multipolar economic age where no single nation, not even the U.S., holds unchallenged dominance. Alliances matter, respect matters, and fair trade practices matter. Eventually, U.S. companies begin lobbying Washington directly. They urge the government to renegotiate terms, rebuild trust, and invest more in African development partnerships. Energy companies, tech manufacturers, auto producers, and agricultural groups stress that Africa is not optional, it is essential. Nigeria and South Africa, witnessing global attention, use the moment to push for stronger cooperative agreements within Africa. They accelerate regional trade frameworks, push for new industrial zones, promote local manufacturing, and negotiate new deals with emerging markets. Africa's influence grows because Africa is asserting itself, not through force, but through strategy. And as negotiations restart with the U.S., the message becomes clear across the global stage. Africa is not a passive player. It is a strategic partner that can make decisions capable of shaking global markets. The U.S. is no longer the automatic choice for African nations. Partnerships must be earned. The hypothetical $120 billion freeze becomes a symbol of a new era where Africa's choices reshape global economics, investment flows, and geopolitical alliances. For the U.S., it is a powerful reminder that the world is changing, and adapting to that change may determine the future of American economic resilience. This is not a story of confrontation. It is a story of awakening. A scenario that reveals the world as it is becoming, a place where Africa stands strong, strategic, and central to the next chapter of global economic history. And as analysts conclude their reports, one message echoes across global markets: the rise of Africa is no longer a prediction, it is a reality.